Part 54. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 536. These geese seemed to be savvy. After listening to the smoke of Bailey's singing, they didn't bite the song anymore, only flapping their wings around the Bailey's engine. The animals are more sensitive than the human senses, and the geese are afraid of the deadness in Yanj. They can't get rid of the song, they can only avoid it. Yanji raised his hand, held the crooked crown on his head, and asked Bailey's Indian, "Is there any clothes I wear in this room? I change my clothes, and now this clothes are too heavy, especially this crown, my neck seems to be broken." Bailixing Smoke quickly reached out to help her go to the crown. "I help you take it off first." The crown of his head caught Yansong's hair. Yansong frowned slightly, and he slowed down. The breath he exhaled was sprayed on Yanj's face. At the moment, Yanj was really drooling. She squeezed her fingers tightly together, and she was afraid that if she let go, she would knock someone down and swallow it. As 100 miles of food, he didn't realize that he was in danger at all. His fingers wrapped her hair and slowly released it reluctantly. He took off the crown, but he did not step back in time, but looking down, she looked at her eyebrows. "Your name is Hong Yan." Hong is surprised by Hong, north geese fly south. Yanj didn't say anything. She pressed her lips tightly and felt that she would drool when she opened her mouth. This is really a very awkward physiological reaction. When he saw her with a blank expression, thinking of her strong woman, she woke up ignorant of the past, and was almost insulted by someone like Wu Tianyi. He must have been very embarrassed in his heart. Then she touched her dark black eyebrow. "Hong Yan, I will protect you in the future, and no one dares to insult you." Although his voice was soft, he was extremely firm. But Yanj felt that her body was different from ordinary people now, and no one could bully her. However, she did not speak. "Although I want to keep a little distance from the man, lest he open his mouth and bid him." However, reluctant to pull away. Just so stiff and motionless. Bailey's Indian didn't see Yanj's response, and his eyes were covered with bleakness. Yes, these empty words must be difficult for her to believe anymore. He slowly retracted his hand and said to her, "There are clothes you can wear in the wardrobe in the house, and there is a hot spring behind the house where you can take a shower." After that, thinking that she could only see some shadows now, she would not even open the closet door, so she took her hand and headed for the room again. Yanj was caught by his warm hands, and there was always an urge to transfer all the warmth from him to himself. She bears it. But when entering the door, he was tripped by the threshold without being guarded. Bailixing Smoke rushed to help her. The words sang in the arms of Bailixing Smoke. The brain buzzed and was instantly filled with the smell of men. Can't help it, what to do? She didn't want to bite the man's words anymore. She was like a fawn, and she looked up and kissed the man's lips. "Find something to do in your mouth. Maybe you don't want to eat? However, this body is a zombie, and I don't know how long I have been lying in the tomb, without brushing my teeth or washing my face. This taste is a bit heavy." Yanj wants to kiss her and let her go to relieve her desire. However, she overestimated her own willpower. This pro-man, she found that the taste in the man's mouth was also very good. She drank the sweet scent from the man's mouth, holding her head with both hands, for fear that the guy would run away. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 537. The emphasis is on the taste, which is better than eating life. The tip of her tongue was like a hunter chasing prey, wandering around his spot. In a short moment, Bailey's Indian turned from passive to active after taking a look from his face, grabbing Yanj's waist and taking a big step toward the bed in the room. Lips and teeth are still tangled, Yanj's body is close to him, just like an octopus, there is no meaning to let go. The complicated and cascading red wedding dress on her body was taken off by hundreds of miles, and she was very difficult to take off. Yanj didn't cooperate at all. After all, she wanted to be different from Bailey Xinjian. She didn't want to distance herself from him at all, she just wanted to be so close to her to get the taste from him. And the smoke of hundreds of miles, the repression in his heart was ignited by her, desperately trying to find a sense of security in her in this way. He was breathing slowly and quickly under the entanglement of her. But thinking of her previous words, he simply picked her up again and walked towards the hot spring behind the house. As soon as the room came out, the sun fell on Yanji, she trembled slightly, and then came back. Looking down, she was naked, and covered only a loose quilt all over her. Hundreds of miles of smoke put her into the hot spring, and she took a few steps back, leaning against the wall of the pool, and kept a little distance from him. The sun is too bright, can you help me build a shed around this? Her voice was soft. When she looked at him, her black eyes seemed to be covered by the water vapor in the hot spring. The petite little face was very pretty because of the paleness on her face. Hundreds of miles of cigarettes have been taken off his own clothes. He almost did not hesitate to say, okay. Turned into the room, put on the clothes first, then found out the quilt, and then stood around the hot spring with a bamboo pole, first set up a simple shed that prevented her from getting the sun, and it seemed very narrow to her. Cozy, then turned to chop bamboo in the bamboo forest again, intending to make a bamboo shed on the hot spring. He was actually a little guilty. She had forgotten her previous memories, and at this time he even took advantage of it and thought that he was a bit too small. Fortunately, I stopped in time, otherwise he would not know how to face her in the future. Yanj is merging the memory of the host. The host this time is called Hanjian. Is a famous princess. She is a princess, not only because of her popularity, but also because of her status as the regent. She has only 28 years in her life. Although short, she has been counseling her brother in the court for more than 10 years. Although she is a woman, she does not lose a boy. As a princess, the host lives up to the princess honor. Unfortunately, his face was thin, and the host died of vomiting due to old injuries when he was 28 years old. The death of the host is mourning all over the country. The host was a relative before her death. Her horse is a general in a neighboring country. The marriage between the two countries was intended to become a better partner in the future. But never thought, eyes narrowed to the day of marriage, but the host hung up. The general who had taken the kiss had already come thousands of miles, entered the capital, but did not receive his bride, but learned the bad news of the bride's death the night before. The host's brother, the emperor, said he was willing to give another general princess to the general. But the general was unwilling. He only needed the host. He stated that his host had a marriage contract, and he or she was a husband and wife. So he married the host's body. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 538. Marry a dead person. And because the groom and bride are not ordinary. Therefore, this event was considered a sensation in the year. However, the general retreated to the court after marrying the host's body, and no one heard of him. This general is 100 miles of smoke. Bailey Xinjian became a new disciple in the small Nandu faction in anonymity, and he was mixed with those in the rivers and lakes from time to go out and kill demons. He did this because the head of the Nandu faction promised him to bring the host back to life. Bailey Xinjian is a very committed person. He made an oath with the head of the Nandu faction, so long as the head of the Nandu faction can bring the host back to life, he will take the Nandu faction as his own life. Later, the head of the body died. Before his death, everyone hoped to place Baolixingyan as the head and asked him to take care of his young son. Baolixingyan has been doing his best to cut off monsters and remove demons. However, I did not expect that after killing a wild boar sperm once down the mountain, the host he had been waiting to wake up. The host not only forgot about the past, but also unknowingly wanted to be with the son of the head Wu Tianyi. The miles of smoke are not blocked. The host forgot his previous life, forgot him, and forgot to go to the grasslands to see the words of Jiangnan, and he couldn't tell her by force. He is used to forbearance, even if he is sad, but if the host is happy, he will only guard silently. The host woke up as a zombie. Wu Tianyi's behavior is not high, but he has a host. He is like a god's help. He has become very famous in a short time. He even went to the capital and became a master. The women around him, there are so many to say, even the emperor intended to give him the princess. The host soberly forgot his previous life that day, and was controlled by Wu Tianyi again. He obeyed Wu Tianyi and regarded Wu Tianyi as heaven. But later, Wu Tian became so devoted that he occasionally realized that the host turned out to be the emperor and his sister of the neighboring country. Once he showed his face, he would attract the attention of others, and the host's body was a disaster-prone physique. Idea. Hundreds of miles of smoke appeared in time to rescue the host. The host is actually not a serious zombie. Wu Tianyi's father, the head of the Nandu faction, used his practical host to conduct experiments. He researched a method of resurrection which is like a crooked path. This way, the host's body is fed with the blood of the most extreme and pure, and the host's soul is locked so that she cannot reincarnate. The head of the Nandu faction, he has experimented with many corpses in private, but only the host has succeeded. Because the host is not only a person of great merit, but also a man who feeds the host. The host and the beetle that can control the host. The head of the Nandu faction wanted to keep it for himself in the future. As a result, he could only secretly pass the secret to his son. The son was too young. He was afraid that the wicked things he had done would be approached by the Chiu family in the future, and he simply sent Nandu to Baolixing. He planned well. Once the host woke up and was controlled by his son, what his son wanted in the future was what he wanted. This matter did develop as the head of the Nandu faction thought. Wu Tianyi has all kinds of fame and fortune for his host, so what he wants is what he wants. Although the host was rescued by 100 miles of smoke, his body was ruined by Wu Tianyi's toss. In order to continue her life, Baolixing continued to feed the host with the blood on her body. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Weipang. Chapter 539. However, even if the host is as it is now, she will still be affected by tapeworms. As long as Wu Tian has orders, she will be struggling frantically. Even if she is bruised all over, she will crawl towards Wu Tianyi. It was also at this time that the former head of the Nandu faction was murdered and killed. The head of Baolixingyan became a back knight. Not only that, the world is suffering from a severe drought. Fortune tellers said that someone had kept zombies privately. Hundreds of miles of smoke, because of the host, he became the object of everyone's scolding and hunting. However, she is not incapable of understanding the hostess who is controlled by the tapeworm. Later, the host sucked blood from the host, and the host was disposed of by Wu Tianyi. As a result, Wu Tianyi has become more popular, and the identity of this teacher is even more convincing. Before the host's soul disappeared, consciousness was restored. She remembered her life, she remembered what she did after becoming a zombie. She was a dignified princess during her lifetime. I don't know how many handsome and promising sons begged her to marry her, but she could not see it. Unexpectedly, instead of sleeping peacefully in the grave chamber after death, he was with a humble man like Wu Tianyi, but whenever he thought about it, the host was disgusted and unwilling to give birth. The wish of the host is also very simple. She hoped that even if she became a zombie, she would not be with a stingy man like Wu Tianyi because of the tapeworm. She hopes to do things she never did before she became a zombie, such as going to the south to watch the smoke and rain, going to the grasslands to see cattle and horses, going to the desert to watch the sun rise, and going to the north to watch the snow. As for the first culprit, 100 miles. She didn't want to treat him. Bailixingyan wanted to resurrect her, although she did not understand the purpose of this general who had never met. And after she became a zombie, he did not protect her, causing her to be touched by a person like Wu Tianyi, and it was unforgivable to think about it. But later, it was this man who saved her and died because of her disgrace. Her thoughts on Bailixing are complicated. If in accordance with her previous style of behavior, let alone Wu Tianyi, it is 100 miles of smoking, she must also dispel such a guy into 5 horses. However, those vivid and memorable memories made her resentful to Bailixing. It was him who did wrong, but it was him who suffered and suffered. After Yanj merged the memory of the host, it really felt like a beeping dog. She didn't expect the host's experience to be so fucking. What scared her most was that Wu Tianyi's maggot had fed the host after he entered the tomb. After feeding the tapeworm, he had the courage to do something with the host so that the female and female tapeworms in their respective bodies could be activated. Fortunately, the host's life was not sober, but this time the song woke up halfway. Although the maggot was fed into her mouth, she is still dormant now, and will be activated once she meets Wu Tian. Fortunately, Wu Tianyi has no chance in this life. Yanj asked the cubs, this time, the mighty one is 100 miles away. Although questioning, the tone is quite certain. Mainly, this configuration of Bailixingian is completely tailored for the powerful. The chicken was busy urinating with 9-tail, and he hurriedly said and at the end he said, be careful, don't drain everyone's blood. Yanji squinted and ignored the chickens. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 540. This conscience, the chicken murmured, but now that there are 9 tails together, although the two beasts can't understand each other, but because of the long system time, even if they can't, they can only find some fun in each other. Because of this, the chicken's attention to the words is naturally not so much. It took an afternoon to set up the bamboo forest. He didn't dare to go too fast, because he was afraid that he would have nothing to do after he had done it, and it would be embarrassing to face the song. After all, he had done that kind of thing before, but whenever he thought about it, he couldn't wait to dig into it. She was lying on her back in the hot spring with her eyes closed as if she was sleeping. He only dared to peek at first, but later realized that she didn't open her eyes, and the peeking turned into an upright and bright look. Probably, I haven't seen her for 10 years. Since she was lying in that cemetery, although he had to take blood for her at midnight every day, he couldn't enter the cemetery. In the past 10 years, he was suffering every day. For a moment, I felt like a dream. Waking up, she was no different from before. See you. Can't help but look at her again. But ran into her black Weavu's eyes. Yan Ji looked up at him and said, hey, do you always see what I do? The rush of the 100 miles of smoking is in the bottom of my heart, but the face looks unstable and extremely calm. He retracted his eyes without a trace, pretending to put the last bamboo pole on the book, and then said to her, you can't always soak in the water. Yan Ji covered his mouth and yawned, aren't I waiting for you to hug me back to the house? I'm asleep when I wait, you haven't come yet. In the memory of Bailixingian, she has always been high and solemn, never heard the soft voice of her little daughter. The bones are really crisp. The ghost sent God to the ground, and her heart felt so guilty because of her words. He really should have taken her back to the house. Although the shed was built outside, the sun did not set. So he took a few steps to the hot spring pool and he reached out to her, I'll take you back to the house. After that, Watching her white and thin shoulders emerge from the water, a sudden excitement in her head. She didn't wear anything, he should find a blanket first. You wait for me. Before he finished speaking, she had taken his hand and pulled him into the hot spring. Balixing smoke was unguarded, and a mouthful of water poured into his mouth, which made him uncomfortable. There is no time to emerge from the water. The soft lips blocked his mouth. Immediately afterwards, her body was attached. She was close to him like a weed in the water. He didn't dare to breathe or struggle. She was already pulling his clothes. No, it's not tearing, it's tearing. With a slight swipe of her nails, his clothes became countless pieces away from him. He panicked. Her hand was walking against his body, and the place where her fingertips rubbed seemed to be on fire, burning to the bottom of his heart. So after a moment of pretending to die, he was busy trying to get rid of her. The next moment both men's heads burst out of water, and he said, don't do this." He didn't know that he was blushing with rouge, only pretending to be serious and pushing her hand that tightly pulled his shoulder. "You, don't do this." He didn't allow Yanj to kiss his lips. Yanj just bit his shoulder, his teeth biting blood on his shoulder. Her tongue twitched a little, but her eyes were raised, and she looked at him with a smile. An indifferent look. Who to lie to, the place is so big, when she is an innocent baby. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 541. Songs of Thirsty Throat. Little Tongue pursed his lips, his eyes dazzled with 100 miles of smoke. Hundreds of miles of smoke was boiling with the blood she stared at. He took a moment, immediately reacted, and hurriedly avoided the eyes of Yan Song. He knew that she had amnesia. What she was doing at this time was definitely not her own heart. Even if her heart was beating fast, he forced himself to calm down and said to her, "Hong Yan, are you cold? I'll take you home." Yanj held his shoulder in one hand, but touched it with the other hand, and heard the words to peck his chin, "I'm not cold, I'm upset. Very uncomfortable, I wanted to eat him bite by bite. Suck his blood, eat his flesh, and his bones, and she didn't want to let go. Thinking of those delicious bloods, she swallowed again without knowing it, gazing at the smoke for hundreds of miles. I feel uncomfortable with smoking." The two words, Xin Yan, were lingering in her shouting. He didn't know that his name was so nice. Bailey Xinjian thought that what was happening to the body of Yanj, and quickly restrained those crooked thoughts in her heart and asked her, "Why is it uncomfortable?" Yanj grabbed his weapon. "There's something here that poke me. My belly seems to be pierced." "What is this? Is it a sword that smokes?" "Miles of smoke." The weapon was pinched so tightly by her that his body was almost leaked. He looked at her steamy eyes, and her pale face was full of curiosity and simplicity. My heart grew more panicky. "No, it's not." He opened his mouth several times and didn't know how to explain. He tilted her head and looked at him as if looking forward to his next story. He wanted to step back, but she clenched his hands tightly on his shoulders, making him want to stay away from her. Yan Ji pinched the object curiously. His body became more and more tightly attached to him. "Xinjian, your body is so warm, it is warmer than the water, especially this sword, it is hot, it seems to want to put my hands, it's hot." Xinjian's face turned red. "You, don't touch it, it's not what you think, you. Yan Song kissed his lips again. Xinjian's body was burning, but at the moment the song was more uncomfortable than her. She was eager to find something to do, lest he really bit him into pieces. She pressed him against the slate at the bank, and ignored his head pressed into the water, and sat down on him. He was struck by the water in his mouth, and he struggled to sit up, but then she lowered her head, pecking at his face and his rolling throat in the water. Gradually, his hands went from pushing her away to holding her waist. He gave up and resurfaced, closed his breath and closed his eyes, feeling the person close to him with his body and heart, trying to deceive himself in such a deceptive way. Yanj worked tirelessly, and as a zombie, probably the only good thing was that she was very energetic, and no matter how she wobbled her waist, she would not be sore or tired. As long as she thinks of the snack under her, she has endless vitality. If he cannot swallow it, he can only use his body to soothe his turbulent heart. After she was exhausted from exhausting her cigarettes, she hugged them and still had no tendency to leave. Bailey Zinjian deceived himself from the beginning, and then his passion burned and burned out, and his mind calmed down immediately, thinking that he had done this kind of thing, and he was anxious to continue to be underwater. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 542. Thousands of miles of cigarettes pushed the shoulder of the inference song on his body, and asked indifferently, "Are you okay?" Not so good. Yanj was unhappy. "I'm not satisfied yet, I want to continue." Miles of smoke. He stared at the moon hanging in the sky. For a moment, my heart was a little desperate and collapsed. He suddenly remembered that at the time, the civil and military of the Manchu dynasty were discussing who would marry the princess, and the princes and grandfathers all refused under various excuses. In private, he laughed and talked about the 3,000-faced princess in the princess's house, changing countless grooms every night. Such a woman, who marries her, can wear countless green hats. He listened to everyone's words as a joke at the time, and thought he knew more about her than everyone else. But now, my heart suddenly felt a little sad. It seems that 3,000 faces should be true. Her appetite was raised by 3,000 faces. He spent 30 years of energy in front of her so little. Yanj's tongue lingered in his throat, and asked in aggrieved, "What are you thinking?" Sue was nourished for a while. Her voice was round and soft. He listened to her voice, and those thoughts vanished for a moment, leaving only the soft people in her arms. He thought, otherwise, take some time to buy some medicine in this area, right or left, and you can't lose your momentum in front of her. I thought so in my heart, but my voice sounded calm. "No, I'm not thinking." His hand touched her thick black hair, and the soft hair was scratching his hand. Although he was a little lost at the bottom of his heart, he was very satisfied. He wanted to live with her like that. Although 10 years later, although she doesn't remember anything now, it doesn't matter that she is still alive. As long as she is alive, he is satisfied. Yanj snorted, "Hug me back to the house." He busily held her up and walked towards the room. I thought she would sleep, but her cat usually nestled in his arms and didn't mean to leave. "Help me put on my clothes." He was in this room and had prepared a lot of clothes for her, and he would help her change every year. Inside and out, there are a whole set of shoes and hair accessories. But how could he get her clothes while holding her? So he patted her gently, and said dumbly, "Would you lie in bed? I'll go to the cabinet to look for clothes." "What color do you like?" "Words, you hold me." The soft voice made him no longer able to refute half. He hugged her and wrapped her waist around her two slender white tender legs. He wasn't wearing any clothes, and his closeness made him uneasy. She had thought that she had been drained of energy for 30 years, but at this moment his body was about to move, and he seemed to have the motivation to become full of energy. Holding her hand on Yanj's waist and reaching her hip, he lifted it slightly and pressed down. Yanj snorted, tightening his neck tighter, but said in his mouth, "I want to wear clothes." Okay, he was like a big wolf trying to coax the little white rabbit, holding her step by step towards the wardrobe. The woman in her arms clung tightly to his arms, like a soft rabbit. Let him do it, and the steps he took were called a spirited spirit. Hongyan, Hongyan, he whispered her name. "How?" Yanj snuggled up in his arms, feeling the rich flavor of meat that was emanating from him at any time, and sighed generally, "That's good. It's great to be able to hold your food without losing your hand." After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 543. Hundreds of miles of smoke seemed to be encouraged, holding her around the house. "Hong Yan, call me," he pinched her hips, and ordered his voice dumbly. "Call me Lang Jun." The words are from the good, Lang Jun. She had a terrible voice, and the two words she shouted into her bones. He lowered his head, biting her ears, and said dumbly again, "Call me to smoke. Smoke. Scream. Smoke, smoke." He peeked again in her soft voice. He held her to the closet, opened the closet and asked her what suit you wanted to wear. Yan Ji pointed freely, "That red set." Xinjian held her in one hand and took out the red suit in one hand. From beginning to end, she wrapped his arms around his neck, and she hung on him with no intention of leaving. He didn't let her go. Seeing her height, she was so snuggled into his arms at this moment, making him content from the body to the heart. Placing her on the bed, he wore her daughter's clothes towards her. He did not help a woman wear clothes, which were extremely complicated, and she did not want to leave his body at all, and did not cooperate with his dress at all. So this time he dressed her. He was really sweaty. But in the end, it was finally worn. She touched his face, "Let's sleep, I'll go to the roof for the moon." Zombies don't need to sleep, they don't need to eat and drink Lazarus. However, she has zombies that she can practice, so she doesn't want to rely on her blood to sustain herself. After that, she reluctantly kissed his cheek again, and then turned around and resolutely went out and jumped onto the roof. Xinjian followed her closely. He didn't dare to sleep. Everything today is like a spring/dream. He is so afraid that when the dream wakes up, nothing will happen. When she practiced, he tilted his head and stared at her. When she was the regent, she looked like an alpine snowdrop that could not be blasphemed high. But just now, she was soft in his arms like the water that entangled him, letting him run freely, and now thinking about the previous scene, his body was numb. If only it was a dream, he thought softly, how good it would last a lifetime. Before dawn, the old ancestors of the Nandu faction approached. There is a formation in the bamboo forest. When the idlers can't come in, even though they are staring at the song, they hear the sound outside the bamboo forest. He swept out the first time. The ancestor went straight to Bailey Xinjian as soon as he was out of the gate. He stared at Bailey Xinjian. "How did you drive out Tianyi?" Bailixing smoke stood against his hand, and showed no sign of weakness in front of him. He violated the rules of the door, broke into the forbidden area without saying anything, and uttered wild words to vilify my Nandu faction. Such an apprentice, what I want him to do. For Wu Tianyi's nature, how can the people of the Nandu school not understand? The ancestors also knew that Wu Tianyi was crazy every day, but he was not expelled from the division. After all, that guy was the son of the former head, and Bailey Xinyan is also a former disciple. He looked at the attitude of Bailey Xinjian and seemed to have no meaning to loosen, and sighed, "He is also your master's son. If you don't look at anything else, you shouldn't look at your master. He was kicked out of the division, and what would others say about you after that?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 544. I'm not afraid of gossip. Bailixing stood upright and calm and indifferent. Such a person is not worthy of entering the Nandu school. If the ancestor thinks I have done something wrong, I can resign from my position. If it is gone. I do nt care what you do to him, but I am here in Nandu one day. He does nt want to step into Nandu school. The genius of the 100 miles of smoke, a rare encounter in 100 years, the Nandu faction was originally an unknown little martial art, which was gradually rising due to the arrival of the 100 miles of smoke. Although the ancestor was called the ancestor, he was 100. There is no 1/10 of the skill in the smoke. It can be said that the entire Nandu school relied on Balik Xinjian to stand alone. Naturally, the ancestors would not give up Balixing for people like Wu Tianyi. After hearing the words, he sighed and said, "I just worry about your reputation. The thing in the martial arts is that you are in charge. Now that you have made up your mind, let's do that." Hundreds of miles of smoke stood in place, waiting for the ancestor to leave, and then flew back to the roof of his bamboo forest hut. Yan Ji's eyes were closed and he was still practicing. Until the sky was bright, her motionless body immediately crooked into the bosom of 100 miles of smoke. "Hug me back." Hanging smoke hugging her immediately returned to the room. He put her on the bed and was about to pull the quilt to cover her, but she had wrapped around his neck and pulled him to bed. She pulled his hands and feet on him, his face froze. "Sleep. I can't eat it." Bailey Xinjian froze and remained motionless. Their faces were so close together that he could almost feel her long eyelashes touching his face. He didn't move, didn't dare to anger, for fear he would wake her up with a little movement. He didn't sleep all night and was tired, so he just fell asleep and hugged her. After the 100 miles of cigarettes fell asleep, Yan Ji opened his eyes and squinted his body to keep him close to him. Then he closed his eyes and enjoyed the satisfaction of this delicious food. The chicken said at this time, "Wouldn't you already sleep him?" After the geeky system was upgraded, Yanj himself also had a lot of autonomy, such as blocking chickens and nine tails every time they were critical. Without waiting for the words to respond, Zhuwei said, "I must be asleep. Look at the two dark circles of the man. At first glance, it is excessive libido." The chicken sighed, his voice was extremely disappointed. "Oh, it's not a good habit for you to sleep silently. See how much you have changed from before. It used to be able to see it on the spot anyway. It is also good to not have a look. Well now, it can't even hear a sound, and they're done. Yanj, if you're jealous and envious, you can sleep alone." The chicken jumped immediately. "If I have a woman, I still use you nonsense. Yanj, the nine-tailed man beside you can be a man and a woman. You can do everything. Try him. Look. Next time you come back, try my 40-meter knife. I promise to keep one of your branches." "Zhuwei, Miss Sister, I am male and I like women. You have a little misunderstanding about me. I think we need to understand it deeply." Yan Ji has ignored these two guys. Not only ignored, but also the sound in the system space of the fans. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 545. As soon as Bailey Xinjian woke up, she opened her eyes and saw a woman close at hand. There was a moment of blankness and peace in the 100 miles of smoke. Without waiting for the reaction, the woman's lips moved closer, and he squeezed his lips. This cool touch made him agitated. His thoughts returned to the cage. Ignorantly touched her chest and closed her eyes again. He felt the softness of the human in his arms with his hands. The beauty is pregnant, and he has forgotten what happened. Under the duvet, he lifted one of her legs, and then went into the ground so finely ground. This is a kind of satisfaction and beauty that is beyond anything. He felt that his body was soaked in her water, that it was soft and messy, but somewhere it was swollen and inflated, and the momentum was raging on her territory. He closed her eyes and chased in her lips, silently, calling her name over and over again, "Hongyan, Hongyan." Yanj was held in his arms, feeling the rapid flow of blood in his body, and several times he couldn't help but want to bite his artery and taste his blood. However, her patience is strong enough. especially after starting cultivation, she can already compete with the desire for blood in her body. In fact, this kind of entanglement is actually more interesting than blood-sucking. She comforted herself. This kind of thing can last for a long time, but the blood-sucking will take a man into a dead body, which is not a good deal. Bailey Xinjian tossed on Yanj's body until the sunlight came in from the window and fell on the two of them. When Yanj frowned slightly, he reacted in a hurry and hurriedly pulled the quilt. But as soon as the two rolled over, the quilt was taken to the ground as an obstruction. He had to grab her clothes and cover her, and tried to help her clean her body. Yan Ji squinted in his arms and said, "Help me wash, dirty." Oh oh oh. Hundreds of miles of smoke held Yanj and walked towards the hot spring outside, and he did not forget to wrap the Yanj with a quilt when he went out. Needless to say, he also knows where to wash. He lowered his head all the way, his face rose red. With her fingers, she carefully cleaned the inside. The first time he saw a woman's place so clearly, though shy, he was more curious. Digging, the fingers sink deeper and deeper into the mud. From time to time, he looked at her eyebrows and saw her squinting and enjoying the movement of her fingertips rushing around in the name of cleaning up. Later, the water was tossing again. He had no energy for her tossing yesterday. But today, after a lot of toss, he was refreshed and full of energy. Dry her body, and help her put on her clothes piece by piece. Bailixing allowed her to lie in her arms. The sunlight outside the window was just right. Although the window was closed, the light hit the window paper, and the rays of light fell like mist and dust around him. He just looked down and looked at her face. Good years and beautiful scenery. If she could be so stunned for a lifetime, he would be willing. I just don't know what she remembered in the future. Will he still depend on him as he does now? The future is unpredictable. But in a blink of an eye, I thought that she could wake up and make his life less painful. In the future, if she dared to leave him in the future and run back to her home with 3,000 heads, he would be a big deal, and then interrupt her legs. Right and left, he would never let her go.